Hello, good afternoon, good evening, almost good evening. Thank you very much for coming to this very relevant session. Today, we have been discussing a lot about equity, and we think that to talk about the decarbonization roadmap is a way to really work on that issue too. Today is our pleasure to have here such a relevant group of speakers who will present the report dealing with a manual for nations to decarbonize in 2050. This is our joint objective. And we have the pleasure to have here the Secretary of State for Energy, Mr. José Domínguez Abascal. He will make some introductory remarks and then the panel will begin. Thank you, Secretary of State, please.
Io non so se devo parlare italiano, che cosa devo parlare. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I will speak in English. The complete decarbonization by 2050 is a goal that we have to assume if we want to fulfill the Paris Agreement. There is no other way. The challenge of climate change gives us a methodological opportunity that no other processes do. It is a huge economic and social transformation with a very clear objective. On other important transformations of our economy, such as digitalization, we do not have a common objective to fulfill, a clear objective to fulfill. We do not know in those processes what is desirable, what is exactly what we have to do, but in the case of decarbonization, we have an end objective, a clear end objective. In Spain, we are working on the development of our long-term strategy 2050 with two clear objectives: the climate neutral economy and leaving no one behind. Those are the two clear objectives of our government. A clear objective is needed to build a path. Committing to that goal is the only way to build honestly where we have to be by 2030 and by 2050. This exercise will provide a strategic and clear guidance for investments in the medium and long term. What solutions can be considered transitory, which ones make sense and which do not make sense. We need to avoid additional investment that will become stranded assets. What solutions are ready and what solutions are not matured yet. And so we will have to define those solutions, but in all cases, the objective is very clear. Our experience is that an ambitious goal of 90% reduction of CO2 emissions by 2050 will need three main pillars. One is energy efficiency, the second one is electrification, the third one is 100% renewable electricity. Without those three pillars, we won't be able to reduce by 90% our emissions. And we should compensate any other emissions in a way such that we become carbon neutral by 2050. To set ourselves the goal of complete decarbonization, as I am saying, this is the best way of developing a new long-term industrial policy that concentrates research efforts on the necessary solutions for the future of the planet, that marks intermediate milestones that simulate talent for innovation and societies. Many solutions are mature. Others, for some industrial sectors, as maritime transport and aviation, are still to be developed. It will not be, however, only the technological solutions that will lay the foundations of decarbonization. imagining a decarbonized economy means also social, organizational, and even cultural solutions. The decarbonization of our economies for 2050 is a challenge and an opportunity, with many co-benefits that must be taken into account: health, jobs, competitiveness, and others. Full decarbonization has to make us reflect on how we want to govern the transformation. It is key that we have multilateral governance. It has to be defended and improved. And as the Spanish government is doing this effort and has taken its responsibility in organizing this COP25 in a multilateral event and in cooperation with the United Nations and obviously with our brother country of Chile. Bringing the energy of youth, environmental and social movements, and the claim for climate emergency into the discussions. These are crucial allies for full decarbonization. We have to integrate everybody, every effort into the main goal, which is a neutral carbon emission by 2050. And we have to link social and climate goals through just transition measures and the commitment to leave no one behind, as I was saying before. We have to push for an inclusive and fair approach where just transition and the protection of the vulnerable people are main drivers of our policies. I would like to thank the Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network for this joint effort of investigation on technology roadmaps for the transition of four and maybe the four most key sectors, which are power, industry, transport, and building. All of us need to work together, and let me finish with the spirit of the COP25. It is time for action. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank you, the Secretary of State for Energy, for this wonderful introduction, and also for touching on most of the most of the themes that I'm going to tell you. So some of them will be some repetition, but I'd like to stress the message. Thank you. I'm Paolo Carnevale. I'm the Executive Director of Fondazione Enrico Mattei. I would like to give you some highlights of the report that we have drafted, that we have launched this year, Roadmap to 2050, a manual for nations to decarbonize by mid-century. This is a report that can be downloaded for free at the website roadmap2050.report. So if everybody can go there, can download it for free, so it is so they can consult it. I would like just to give you some introductory word, and also reminding that the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, in the report of 2018, they stated that limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And in recent years, it has become clear that this scenario would require not only a transformation of our energy system in order to meet our global emission targets, but also rethinking the way we control the temperature in our homes, we travel around our planet, and we manufacture our goods. So decarbonizing for a zero-emission world by mid-century would require clear and efficient measures to be adopted and implemented rapidly, and in this report we just demonstrated that we have the technology to pursue this direction. Scientists, engineers, and technical experts can play a crucial role in the design of the pathways for the decarbonization of the energy-intensive sectors. And I have here with me on the podium the chairman, the co-chairs that have analyzed the four main energy-intensive sectors that are power, hard-to-abate industry, transport, and buildings. So, just making some of history of the genesis of this report, in April 2019, more than 70 technical experts from around the world gathered in Milan in our premises to a scientific workshop. This workshop was co-organized in partnership with the Sustainable Development Solution Network to discuss the state of decarbonization of technologies that can accelerate the global shift toward decarbonization. And we analyzed this fourth sector, but we also identified that land use agriculture was another critical sector to close the emission gap, because it accounts for at least 1/4 of the total emission of greenhouse gases. But we decided that because of this specificity, this will be part of our job for next year. So, following the Paris Climate Agreement aim to strengthen the global response to the climate crisis in the context of the sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty, this Roadmap 2050 project is conceived on a system approach that is aspiring to simultaneously address multiple objectives and promotes policy instruments and technological solutions that can be used across sectors. The multiple objectives span from decarbonization, environmental sustainability, economic prosperity and social inclusion that leaves no one behind. Policy instruments include public investment, the phase out of the subsidy for the fossil fuels, the market mechanism, regulatory framework and regulation on land use, while technological solutions address a wide range of existing or innovative solutions that are coming from smart power grids up to the synthetic fuels. So a system perspective that recognizes the interconnectivity of actions towards any one or more of these objectives, using any one or more of the mentioned policy instrument or technological solutions. We know that an action in one sector can be detrimental to another if not properly managed, while some combined efforts could amplify the cumulative effects and achieve multiple objectives. Making an example, the power grid itself represents a complex system that must continue to operate reliably and efficiently, even as undertakes the deepest transformation in its history. So the message here in the report is clear that no single policy or single technology can be applicable everywhere or can achieve decarbonization by itself, or be implemented without due consideration of its ripple effect or without taking into consideration the delicate state of the current and broader system. And again, using the proverbial expression, we must rebuild an airplane while it is in flight, and we don't want it to crash with it. So in taking a system approach, many complementarities have been identified and considered into managing the complexity of the energy system. I just mentioned some of them here. There are complementarities on variable renewable energy sources, because wind, solar, and hydropower, they vary by the minute, by the day, by the season, and also by the year, because of the climate change. They are even changing the pattern of the rain, for example. So digital system can play here a very large role in coordinating the augmented grid complexity and the required flexibility. There are also complementarity among zero carbon technologies, because one obvious example, zero emission vehicles depend on complementary zero carbon energy sources and the infrastructure to fuel them. There are also complementarities in public and private investment, because parts of the energy systems are in private for-profit hands, parts are publicly owned. So it will take a significant effort and analysis to harmonize public and private investment in order to recognize the diverse role that they can play and the synergies they can create together. There are also complementarities in natural engineered systems. Just to make an example, if we want to achieve negative emissions, these require the biological storage of carbon dioxide in vegetation and soils, and this can be achieved through the preservation of the existing forest, the restoration of the degraded habitats, and the reforestation of the existing ones to increase the natural carbon sinks. There are also complementarities in mitigation and adaptation. There are the two ways that we face the decarbonization by 2050 in order to face the climate crisis. Adaptation measures can also contribute to mitigation strategies, because, for example, forest restoration and protection of the coastal wetlands would help resist storm surges from the rising sea levels. They can promote resilient food production and secure the carbon sinks. So in this way, they can serve both adaptation and mitigation purposes. There are complementarities in centralized and decentralized solutions, because renewable energy resources are by nature different from one place to another. And restriction on land availability and use may also require different power configuration according to the different geography that I find me to operate. There are also complementarities of actions and strategies in different geographies, just to give you an idea how complex the system is. Because effort to address decarbonization might be similar for big cities in North America, also in Europe, but they do not apply in cities that are in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Also, urban areas are different from the rural ones, especially in developing countries where the fight to bring access to energy and other services to all is still a challenge. I just want to mention here that in Africa, more than 600 million people has no access to electricity, so you can understand which is the different perspective. So trying to impose the same pathway in different contexts can lead to failure and to the continuation of the business as usual scenarios, and we don't want this. Then, finally, there are complementarities also in research and development activities supported by research institutions and academia, funded by the private and public sectors. These activities should aim at promoting breakthrough innovation to feed continuously the process of decarbonization and keep also under control any risk of lock-in to solutions that may fail to contribute to the total decarbonization in the long run. So I would like now to leave the room to the experts that they will tell you what they found in terms of solutions and issues regarding the four energy-intensive sectors. But before that, I will leave also the room to the Professor Jeffrey Sachs for his introduction remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo, and thank you for the partnership on this wonderful project. I won't speak long, and I can't even stay long because of all of the events in the neighborhood, and you have experts here to listen to. But let me just emphasize the policy framework that we are operating in. We know that to achieve the Paris goals, we need to reach zero by 2050 of net emissions. This has to be the overriding message of this COP. Very, very few countries have made plans or even done the analysis of what it means to reach zero. By next year, if this is going to work, all countries need to come to Glasgow a year from now with a clear understanding of what is the path to zero, and with this path already incorporated in the basic legal structure and strategy of the countries. This is a huge undertaking. We're way behind, of course, a quarter century behind in carrying this out. But given the fact that next year is really the last chance to stay within the Paris limits, we have to do everything possible to get this right. What I hear from delegations around this COP and from groups like the finance ministers that are meeting, or the parliamentarians that are meeting, or the World Business Council and the business groups that are meeting, is that there is no understood framework almost anywhere. Too much negotiating over words, too little brainstorming over solutions in general. We need now the engineers in the lead, but they need to be given the specifications. What do we need to do to get to zero? The basic framework is quite clear. Decarbonize the power sector so that electricity is zero carbon, and then electrify everything possible. This is the basic strategy. It gets you 70% of the way. The other part is for difficult sectors to use the renewable energy in a more complicated loop. For example, to produce a hydrogen loop for ocean shipping, or a hydrogen loop for hydrogen fuel cells for heavy industry, and so on. So the basic pathways are clean electricity, synthetic fuels produced by clean electricity, electrification of everything possible, meaning transport and buildings and part of industry, and clean fuels, whether it's synthetic methane or ammonia or hydrogen or other fuel carriers, for the part that can't be directly electrified. And then that idea has to be incorporated in everybody's thinking around the world for the coming year and actually for the next 30 years. Because this is not a year-to-year project, this is a transformation that's needed over the next 30 years. So this is the purpose of this roadmap, to sketch this out, to give tools for policy analysts, to give a strong push to governments, do your homework. Tomorrow, Europe will release its Green Deal, the Commission. That will have to be followed by the homework, how to do this within Europe. Europe will be negotiating with China. How do we partner so that China is doing the same? That has to be based on a technology roadmap for the Belt and Road Initiative and for China's own decarbonization, and so forth. This is really the purpose. Think practical. Do not think in 5 or 10-year intervals anymore. And a point that I keep emphasizing everywhere, don't plan to 2030. 2030 is already here in your infrastructure. It's already set. Plan to 2050. That's what we're doing right now. Not to 2030. You've got that 90% already set or 95% set. It's to 2050 that we must decarbonize. Please don't build anything more with fossil fuels, because it will have to be scrapped. It will be a waste of time and a waste of money. So everything now is get to zero, and now I turn it back to the experts who know how to do it. Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Manfred Hafner from FEAM. So first of all, wonderful congratulations to Spain for having organized such a short time, such a wonderful conference. Congratulations. I'm going to speak about power, and then we have different speakers who speak different sectors. Now, we have heard we need to limit the increase of the temperature to maximum 1.5 degrees. This means carbon neutrality by 2050 and negative carbon afterwards. As far as the power sector is concerned, we need to fully decarbonize the electricity sector. Now, the energy sector in general and the electricity sector in particular are going through a total revolution. This is due to top-down, policy-driven decarbonization efforts and trends. This is due to bottom-up, technology-driven, market-based digitalization. And also due to, thanks to these new technologies, decentralized ways of producing electricity. Smart grids and Internet of Things modify the way we produce, consume, transport electricity from a unidirectional to a multidirectional flow of electricity. We all know renewable energy sources, the cost of those have plummeted. They have fallen dramatically by 80% in half a decade. And this is going to continue. In particular, watch out for, well, we have seen recently the huge fall was for PV. Watch out for offshore wind in the future. where we may expect very dramatic cost reductions and very dramatic deployment. Of course, very large deployment of variable, non-dispatchable renewable energy sources require new approaches related to flexibility. We do have a lot of solutions for flexibility. We have dispatchable backup power, but that's just one of the different options we have. We need demand-side management, which we have. We need to exploit further. Interconnections with adjacent regions and countries, and here we need to do more also in this country with the north. Storage, not only pumped hydro, but also batteries, and I will come back to batteries later on. And market coupling. Market coupling means, for instance, power to heat, power to hydrogen, power to transportation sector. I will come back to that as well. Now, as far as batteries are concerned, there's a big, many people speak about batteries, that we are just about to have very big breakthroughs. We think we need much more R&D, research and development for batteries, because we are not yet there. There are issues related to battery performances. Yes, they are better, but they are not yet good enough. We need to increase costs. Yes, the costs have come down, but they are not low enough yet. We have issues related to market concentration. Some countries holding the battery, so we need to diversify and having also industrial policy for batteries in different countries. And an issue with rare earth materials, and I know my friend, he will come back to that later on. Sector coupling is also related to power to gas, and here the idea is when we have a lot of wind and solar, this wind and solar, which is non-dispatchable, at times it may produce much more than we need. And so this overcapacity, overproduction of electricity can be converted into something storable, which electricity is not easily storable, something storable which is hydrogen. And this can be done through electrolysis. Electrolysis, the cost of these are coming down, but they are not low enough yet. We can also use biogas. Biogas through methanization can produce hydrogen. But we can also use natural gas. With natural gas, we have all these pipelines, the infrastructure which is already there. Instead of scrapping it, using natural gas and then using steam reforming and therefore producing, cracking and therefore producing hydrogen out of the natural gas, plus carbon capture and storage or carbon capture and use in order to get rid of the CO2 is a way to produce hydrogen, as is pyrolysis, where you produce CO2 in a solid form, which has much less of an issue of public acceptability. Now, all this hydrogen can then be used for mobility services, for fuel cell cars, for public transport, for trains, can be used in industry, for refineries, for steel production, for chemical industries. It can be used for heating. It can be used for power by re-electrification of green gas. Sector coupling also means grid to vehicles and back to grid. Once a large part of our transportation sector, of our cars, are electric, all these batteries, they can be used partly as a storage device. And another point are, of course, the BECCS and the DACs. It's not enough to fully decarbonize. Eventually, we need to become carbon negative. And also, by 2050, it's not possible to decarbonize everything. There are parts which are not easily decarbonizable. So we need to start also to become carbon negative. And this can be done, the BECCS, which is bioenergy and carbon capture and storage. So the idea is you grow plants which absorb through photosynthesis the CO2, then you produce biomass. The biomass, you put it in a power plant, you produce electricity, and the CO2 which you produce, you store it. so you are carbon negative. Or you have DACs, which is direct air and carbon capture and storage, which means you absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere, and then once you have absorbed it, you store it in the underground, or you produce solid CO2. The problem is it uses a lot of energy, of electricity, but whenever electricity is in oversupply, the cost of it is zero, price of it is zero. So you can do that. Of course, all of this does not make any sense if you do not first of all address the fuel mix. It does not make any sense what we have done so far in Europe by investing very heavily into renewables, which is a good thing and which we needed to do, but not addressing very often the coal issue. In Europe, one-fourth of power generation is out of coal, but coal represents 3/4 of total CO2 emissions of the power sector in Europe. We need to get rid of the coal. And this coal CO2 emissions in the power sector, this is bad for the climate, it's bad for the environment, and it's bad for human health. If you look at Germany, for instance, they have decided to invest very heavily in renewables. They have decided to phase out nuclear in 11 years, which they are doing. And they are now, very late, they have just decided this year to phase out coal, possibly by 2038, which is in 19 years. This does not make a lot of sense, does it? So we need to phase out coal now. And if you have an issue with miners, in Germany it's 0.07%. It's almost nothing. We pay them off. And there is gas. You can use natural gas in the meantime. You reduce by half the CO2 emissions. Later on, you need to decarbonize the natural gas, of course. And later on, you can go for full electric. Last point, which relates to the economics. We need also to rethink the electricity price formation mechanisms. As you know, now price of electricity is done on marginal costs. When you think about more and more having renewable electricity, this is heavy capital intensive, but almost zero marginal cost. This does not give the right incentives to build new renewables. So we need to have capacity-based pricing. Just think about broadband, internet, telephony. We do not pay anymore the bytes we consume. We do not anymore pay the minutes we consume. We pay a subscription, a capacity. And this we will need to do for electricity as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. Renato Mazzoncini, Polytechnic of Milan. I lead the transportation section of a roadmap. Of course, it's not possible to describe in few minutes the contents of a roadmap, but some highlights only to push your curiosity, and I invite you to read the report that is also very easy to read, because the target is to tell to everybody that we have now the technology to arrive to CO2 zero into 2050. Talking about mobility, it's clear that we have different sections of mobility, because we have land mobility, shipping, and aviation. Talking about mobility, the bad news is that mobility is 25% of the CO2 problems. Only mobility more than all the industry of cement, chemistry, steel. So it's really a disaster. And in the last 40 years, the final total consumption in mobility grew of 250%. So it's clear that it's very difficult to stay in this situation. Talking about land mobility in railways is easy. We have to electrify. Pay attention, people think that the railways are electrified, but it's not true. Only 40% of the railways worldwide are electrical. The other are with oil internal combustion. So the rest of land mobility is automotive and freight transport, so heavy truck. For automotive, we think that it's possible to go full electric in 2050. So we think that it's possible to have in 2050 100% of electrical vehicles all around the world. This year we have 5 million of light vehicle with battery, and last year 2 million of full electrical vehicles sold. But the problem is the battery. Manfred talked about battery before. It's clear that battery is the real bottleneck for all the decarbonization, mobility, power generation, building, and so on. In this moment, if you think to the Tesla Gigafactory, probably all of you know Tesla Gigafactory. Tesla Gigafactory is able to produce 300,000 vehicles each year. One factory, 2 billion of investment. So if you want to go to 80 million of vehicles, that is the actual production, we need about 240 gigafactory. So I say that in our countries is a good investment to invest in a factory for battery, because it's surely the future. In this moment there is a problem for the raw material, because there is cobalt that is necessary for the anode, that is difficult to find, but there are lots of research in this direction, and I think that it will be possible in some years to really arrive to a huge investment in batteries and so electrical vehicles. For heavy truck, so freight transport on road, it's very difficult to think to have trucks with battery. Probably for short range is possible, but not long range. And so the solution that we put on the report is electric roads. There are also here in Europe some pilot in Sweden, in Germany, also in Italy we are working for. Electrification with catenari, like trains, very simple, with pantograph on the trucks. It works. There are also studies and research very interesting for induction to recharge vehicles, also light vehicle and heavy vehicle with induction. Very, very interesting, because it's much more easier like infrastructure, of course. And so for freight transport on road, the solution is a mix of battery, hydrogen can be, and electric roads. For shipping and aviation is much more difficult. There are lots of study to improve the efficiency of the ship and of the plane. And for example, the new plane produced by Airbus, Boeing, and others are able to reduce of 25% the consumption. But it's clear that to arrive to CO2 zero in shipping and aviation, we need to shift fuel. So we need to shift in the direction of biofuel or synthetic fuel. On the shipping, probably it's possible also to improve hydrogen. On the plane is really very difficult. Last but not least, very interesting, the concept of mobility as a service. All the world is talking about mobility as a service. It's a digital platform to integrate all the modes of transport, to give door-to-door solution to customers, last mile with intercity transport. And it's very interesting because mobility as a transport, so share mobility. From a cultural point of view, we pass from the culture of possess to the culture of access to mobility. That is the general concept of the sharing economy. And mobility as a service is able to optimize a lot the mobility. So there are different studies that says that it's possible to satisfy the actual demand of mobility using half 50% of the actual vehicle. So it's true that we are growing to arrive to 9.5 billion of people in the world in 2050, but there are different towns that using public transport, sharing mobility and so on, in these years are growing like population and decreasing like number of vehicles, cars and so on. Thank you very much. Building.
Excuse me. Excuse me. So, good afternoon. Excuse me for the inconvenience. And I'm Niccolò Aste from Politecnico di Milano. I have just a few minutes to introduce our work about the building sector in the roadmap. You know that at the worldwide level, the building sector accounts for 40% of the total energy consumption, which means also for the total emissions, environmental impacts and pollution. So in a decarbonization perspective, we can't disregard the building sector. And maybe it is the most important sector for the numbers, for his weight. And we have also to consider that most of our buildings are so-called heritage buildings, outdated, old, inefficient, with high consumption. We are talking about zero energy buildings, but our rate of renovation of the building stocks, of the building European and also at world level, stock is around 1-2% per year. And we can think to nearly zero, once it was net zero, but something has changed, nearly zero energy building, but it has to be a new construction with new technologies, with new systemic approach. And in this sense, we have to focus our attention on the so-called energy retrofit. We can refurbish existing buildings and we can transform them in efficient organisms with a very better energy and environmental performance. And for example, at the Politecnico, we are working on a European Horizon project in which we can transform existing buildings in smart buildings, which means nearly zero energy building with control automation systems to improve their efficiency with a cost of around 300 euros per square meter, which is very convenient. So we can renew our existing building stock. And what are the issues we have to work on nowadays? So at first, the technological development. We have to work forward on envelope technologies, new envelopes, not only insulated but also interactive in respect to the climate, to the place, to the context. And then new and more efficient technical systems. As an example, heat pumps are very improving in the last years. And of course, the integration of renewable directly in the building, at the building level, the BIPV, Building Integrated Photovoltaics. And I have lost 15 minutes? More? Okay. And so to be brief, we have to promote the awareness of the people, especially of the architects, and we have to change and to move from an architecture based on the fashion to an architecture based on the facts, on the reality, and on the needs of this society. And this society needs to be sustainable. Thank you so much.
Okay, Maurizio Masi, once again from Politecnico di Milano, and I was coordinating the panel for the heavy sector industry. So I have probably the most difficult job to do because we had to consider that the global direct carbon dioxide emission and other greenhouse gases that are coming from the heavy industrial sector today are 21% of the total emissions. If you are thinking to 2050 and we are using the natural growth scenario, considering a world that is increasing in the demand because we are facing to move from 7 billion people to 9 billion people in 2050, the new emission will be around 26% of the total. That is an emission level that is totally incompatible with the scenario in which we want to keep the increase of the temperature within 1.5 degrees centigrade. That means that the heavy industry sector must reduce its emission by 40% from here to 2040 while increasing the number of material that is introducing in the market. How we can do that? The problem is that we cannot simply shift from the fuel. So from fuel to electrification is only one part of the story. We are in the process emission of greenhouse gases that are due to the chemical reaction that we are using to produce our things. Simply to have a common, a very simple example, the calcination reaction from limestone to produce cement is a reaction that simply by itself accounts for 50% of the overall emission of carbon dioxide. So we have something to do. And what we can do, it depends by the sector. There is not a general rule. So there are solutions for start to decarbonize in the steel industry, solution to decarbonize the cement industry, and solution to decarbonize the petrochemical industry. What we can do by sector? For example, one of the main results was that in the cement system, the real, besides some electrification in giving the energy, the use of biomass not in competition with the food chain is part of the solution. In countries like Brazil, there are possible to have biomasses that can be used directly in combustion to avoid the generation of an additional CO2, despite that from the calcination reaction. To compensate the calcination reaction, we have only one route that is feasible everywhere. It's the carbon sequestration. In particular situation, we can have a reaction with other minerals that can subtract the carbon dioxide, but it's really a solution for limited position on Earth, because it's not possible to have that distributed. For the problem of steel, the classical blast furnace rely on carbon for the reduction of mineral coal. And that is what is done since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now we have a lot of retrofit of this plant, decreasing the number, the requirement of energy, but is not the solution. The solution is to move to another reduction agent, for example, like hydrogen. And in Swedish steel, they already are implementing a pilot plant where the reduction of the mineral iron ore is done by hydrogen. Which is the problem? The size of the pilot plant is 8,000 tons per year. A standard, very commercial stainless steel factory is 8 million tons per year. So we need to increase the scale. We know the technology, we simply have to do the scale up. And in Swedish Steel, they are thinking to do all the experiment about the pilot plant ended by 2025, so now, and to have the full stainless steel factory by 2040. So they are already on the route. From the chemical and petrochemical industry, here you have to consider that we need to reach very high temperature, and so in some cases the electrification is part of the solution. So giving the energy through electricity that is coming from renewable sources. The other problem in that case is that we are facing a fully integrated system. So in a petrochemical plant, you have thousands of lines that are interconnecting, one part to another. Acting in one part without to think about which is the impact on the other section of the petrochemical plant is a mess. So you need to have really a solution that is integrated for the full plant. Full plant that can shift in the feedstock. Today we are using oil. In some cases we are using natural gas. There is one source of carbon, because most of the chemistry rely on carbon, is the use of green chemistry, so using natural product or using the recycled product. So we are producing a lot of waste, and today one of the key words is from power to chemistry, because power to chemistry allow the generation of profits. And that is relevant because I strongly believe that the market is driving the transition. If the transition do not affect the taxpayer can really accept the modification that we are going to introduce. So the idea of introducing the circularity and the green chemistry in the chemical sector is already a roadmap that is well designed. For the moment, also here we are at the level of the size of the plant that is not the real plant that we have commercially today. Not only the news, because in the chemical sector the energy component is so relevant for the final price of the product, that the industry, the chemical sector is pushing a lot in the retrofitting of all the existing plants to reduce the energy impact. And that is really relevant. If you consider one number that I know because was released just last week, is that the Italian chemical sector already reduced the emission well ahead the European goal of 2030. So we are more or less 10 years ahead. So we are probably facing the possibility to really arrive to the decarbonization at 2050. Thank you for your attention.
So I think that yes, this is all for us from our side. I hope that we have given to the audience a quite comprehensive picture of the content of this report, and the fact that this report is made by the engineers for the policymakers. So the policymakers find inside the report what are the roadmaps, the pathways to decarbonize the former energy-intensive sectors. Our goal now is to basically for next year is to tackle with another issue that we were just mentioned at the beginning of my speech, is basically land use agriculture. because agriculture and use account for 1/4 of the total greenhouse gas emissions coming from livestock, from deforestation, from the fossil fuel uses, from the use of fertilizer. So this is something that we will look at it, and also we will try also to make some toolkits for the government from this report in order for them to better understand what they have to do in order to really decarbonize, and arriving in 2020 at the COP26 with some clear ideas of what they can set their NDCs for next year, for the next period up to 2050. So thank you very much for listening to us today, and I will give you the word. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we have contour programming over there, but it has been very interesting, really very, very interesting. So I wonder, these reports, to what extent can be used also for developing countries? I'm working in the Inter-American Development Bank, and I think that many of the issues you have raised, of course, those countries are in a different stage. So to me, it could be very interesting to learn briefly, how do you see that? What lessons would be useful, or if you consider to really perhaps make any specific chapter for those countries? How do you see that? Because it's really very useful.
And excuse me, if I may ask a question as well, I would like to know if you are planning to make an assessment, economic impact of these measures in these sectors, in jobs, in co-benefits for health, if you're planning to do that in a second stage or planning to do something like that for the future.
Okay, I will try to first of all to reply to the first question. The report has been conceived not as something that was not looking at the socio-economic context. This report has been done, okay, let's plan for decarbonization, but let's consider since the beginning the fact that if we operate in Europe or in North America, the pathway that we follow here will be completely different from what we do in Africa or on low income or developing countries, because the socio-economic context is completely different. So we can't pretend to apply the same recipe that we have used in the northern part of the world for the southern part of the world. So this is very clear. So the world must go to different speeds. So what we can do here cannot be replicable in the urban areas, but also in the industry sector, in the power sector, in the buildings, etc. So maybe in the buildings it will be even easier because we have the problem of the heritage of the building. So the retrofitting for us is even difficult. But if we need to play for the new buildings, there. And again, talking about the low-income developing countries, the challenge will be in Africa. Africa today, as already mentioned, has 600 million people that have no access to electricity. There's 700 million people that they have no clean cooking. So all those people must be brought up to speed to the rest of the world, first of all. So they have access to energy. But the point is that Africa will see the major growth in terms of population up to 2050. Now they are 1.1 billion people, and 2050 will be 2.4. So the biggest demographic growth in the world, also comparing to Asia, that will increase only for 750 million people. So if we lose the challenge in Africa, we lose the challenge for the world. So, but we need to apply the roadmap needs to be applied according to the socio-economic context. That is the first piece. The second question, then I will also leave the room to my co-speakers. Yeah, the economic impact will be assessed in the second stage, because first of all we need to. The purpose of this report was, are we sure that there are the technological solutions to arrive to decarbonization? Because most of the people are saying yes, but it is a nice to have, but we cannot do it now. We need to breakthrough technology. We don't need breakthrough technologies. There are some economic scale that we need to bring to surface maybe. But there is nothing new, so we can do this. If we have a breakthrough technology, this will just shorten the path, but the technologies are there. So the economic impact is something that we can assess later on, right?
If I may just add one word to what Paolo said. is that the roadmap, there are different technologies for different countries, which then need to pick whatever is suitable for them. And of course, for Latin America, this applies as well as for other countries. And we have tried to make an effort to look at both developed countries as well as developing countries. The extreme cases being the one Paolo mentioned, the Sub-Saharan Africa. But but we are happy to work together with you on Latin America as well, of course.
And to conclude, it's clear that there are different stages between different countries, but in the tender to arrive to CO2 zero in 2050, the differences between the different stages is not so big. So we have all to run a lot.
No, aspetta.
Another question. Oh, sorry.
In shortly. Okay, here we are. First of all, thank you very much for all the interesting information. I'm from social sciences, so every single time an input from the technological perspective is more than welcome. But I have a reverse question now for all of you. So once you figure out, and thank you for noticing that there are spillover effects, obvious ones, if we start switching from a particular energy to another one, that the switch is not as beautiful as we portray it in the talk about sustainability. The policies that are around the fuel, but also in other fields of law, have you researched into that, if that is a possibility, if the transformation like this can be actually enacted according to the other policies that are seemingly unconnected to the energy sector, but influence largely as to how you're going to be able to implement those solutions at the end of the day? So that would be my question to the panel, please. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the remark and the question. As Paolo said in his introductory speech, what we need to do in order to solve the climate issue is to have a holistic approach, is to look at not at one issue, but at all the issues together. And fundamentally, in addition to looking at the different problems all together, we also need to tackle, which we think is one of the fundamental issues, the governance issue. And the governance issue, which means two things. On the one hand side, inside a country, the social inclusiveness of everybody, trying to create ownership of this, not excluding anybody, not feeling anybody to be excluding, or that somebody else, that the poor have to pay the bill for the rich, as it very often happens, that we are arrogant, that we are just imposing them something to do. So to create ownership, democratic way, both top-down but also very much bottom-up, very important. So this is one part. The other one is related to international governance. We cannot go along by telling poor countries what they need to do, or even, but this we have understood, we need to work between rich and poor, the developed and the not developed countries, but also I think we need to involve the hydrocarbon producers. We cannot win the battle if we tell everybody we will not use oil and gas anymore, and so Saudi Arabia and Russia, they're going to be losers. We need to find ways to have them part of the story. Saudi Arabia, for instance, they could produce hydrogen out of photovoltaics. Russia could produce hydrogen out of biomass, natural gas. And we have other solutions. So to find, whatever they are, win-win solutions for everybody. Otherwise, when you have part of the people inside your country or part of the countries on the planet which are blocking the whole thing, we will not succeed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.